Hey folks, Jason Justice here. Remember, I'm at www.jasonjustice.com. And here's another lesson today, and this time I want to talk about organizing our practice time. This week I had one of my students, to rename nameless, who is an excellent young man and who has, in a year and a half, has gone, I can't even describe how well he's done. He's a very gifted young man. But he came into his lesson, and his book looked like somebody had taken it and opened up the binders and thrown it up in the air, gathered it into a pile like leaves, and stuck it back inside of this book. There's something a lot of sax players have in common, and that is that we can be a little unorganized. So let me tell you how I would suggest that you organize a 30-minute practice time, okay? Especially for beginners, all right? 3 minutes, the first 3 minutes of any half-an-hour practice session is long tones, okay? Now you can go to my website, and there's downloadable stuff there, some links to some other websites where you'll get some ideas on what to do for long tones. But that having been said, first 3 minutes are long tones. The 5 minutes after that, work on scales, okay? Scales are very important. If you've already gotten through C major, G major, B flat major, you know, the basic scales, F major, whatever, all of those basic scales, if you're starting to get through those, what I suggest you do is to go to the hardest scales on whatever kind of scales you're working on and start with those first, okay? If you're working on major scales, that could be F sharp major, D flat major. If you're working on Dorian scales or minor scales or whatever you're working on, whatever is that week is what you're focusing on, go to the hard ones. Trust me, after about 4 or 5 days of working on the hard ones and getting those under your fingers, everything else is going to seem like nothing, okay? So that's something that I do in my practice, and I absolutely recommend, if you've gotten to a point where you're able to read a few scales on that major scale page, start going for the hard stuff, okay? It's going to really make a difference in how you play. The second, or the third thing to work on are patterns, okay? We're going to talk about 2-5-1 patterns. You'll find those on my website. Anything that you come across on the internet that's downloadable, that a lot of people have, you know, minor kind of patterns or dominant patterns, whatever it is, patterns really get you inside of how your horn works. And they also bring you more into the lexicon of the music that you want to play. If you want to be a jazz, R&B, blues, rock and roll, improvisational player, then it's going to be really imperative that you work on 2-5-1s and work on moving up scales by thirds and work on arpeggios. These are all things that are going to come in very handy with what you're doing. Also, if you're really into classical music, the same thing applies. This stuff works for anything that you do, okay? From classical to jazz. And I love to play classical as well as jazz, any kind of style actually. So I look for patterns and things to work on that are interesting, that are challenging, and that are going to make me an overall more well-rounded player, okay? Now, after you get done with the long tones and the scales and the patterns, that's 13 minutes out of the half an hour. We've got another 17 minutes that you devote to tunes, okay? To your classical repertoire, to your jazz repertoire, whatever it is that you're working on. If you're working out of books and you, like, say you bought movie songs made easy for saxophone, or for alto sax, or for tenor sax, whatever instrument it is that you're playing. Be sure and pick a couple out of there and work on them. Now, once you've got them down, don't just keep working on them. You got to work on new stuff too. And if you go to my website, you'll see some easy jazz stuff that I recommend that you get and work on. Some books that have some easy jazz tunes in it that I recommend people get, especially the Jamie Aebersold Maiden Voyage book. Okay, it has a bunch of great jazz tunes in it that are pretty easy to play to varying degrees. And it's a fantastic book, and I think everybody, when they're starting to play, should get that book, because that's really that's the meat. That's where all the jazz stuff, the meat of all the jazz stuff starts, is in that Maiden Voyage book. And I use it with all my students. I make them all get that book. So, all right, so we've got a half an hour gone of practice time. If you're an adult, I know that finding a half an hour can be difficult. If you're a student in school, you shouldn't have any problem finding a half an hour. If you just practice during the commercials in an hour-long show, you probably get about a half an hour plus 35 minutes worth of practicing in, because commercials, they have so many of them nowadays in those shows. So just be sure and get at least 6 days, half an hour a day's worth of practicing in. And also be sure and organize your practice like I'm talking about. And the one mistake a lot of saxophone players make, and this young student of mine was making, is that his book and everything was so disorganized, he didn't know what to practice. He didn't know where to go to practice anything. All of his music was jumbled together. And this is what I would like for you to do with your books, okay? Get a spiral notebook, and the first part, long tones. Second part, scales. Third part will be your patterns, okay? And then the last part will, of course, be for tunes, right? And I divide mine into classical, repertoire, and then jazz, straight ahead jazz, and then Latin jazz tunes. I love Latin music, Latin jazz, and so, of course, I make all my students have a section of that, and we work on that kind of a thing as well. So hopefully this will give you an idea of what you need to do to organize your practice to make yourself a better musician. And you will find within a couple of months that you'll look up and be like, oh, wow, I just practiced for an hour and 15 minutes and had no idea you were doing it. It's a very cool thing to have happen to you. The first time that happened to me back in music school, I looked up and I'd been in the practice room for about 3 hours, and I was like, wow. I had stopped watching the clock. Oh, when is this half an hour over? Oh, I've got to practice my scales. Oh, And it took me a long time. This isn't something I learned when I was first starting to play in junior high and high school. It took until I was an adult. So use my experience to help yourself organize your practice so that you become a better sax player, a better musician in a lot quicker time. Until we talk again, my name is Jason Justice. I'm a sax player and an educator here in Denver, Colorado. Feel free to visit my website, www.jasonjustice.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at lessons, LESSONS, at jasonjustice.com. And like I said, this is an easy. If playing the saxophone was easy, everybody'd be doing it. But if you organize your practice, you're going to be a better musician in a hurry. See you soon. Bye-bye.